I'll transfer the shares after the honeymoon. She won't see it coming." Jonathan's voice was calm, almost bored. Madeline Harper stood frozen just outside the suite at the Plaza Hotel, her hand still resting on the gold handle. Through the half-open door, she could see his reflection in the tall window overlooking Fifth Avenue. Manhattan glittered behind him like nothing in the world could go wrong. He was laughing softly. "No, Claire," he said into his iPhone. "The wedding is optics. The board needs to see stability. After that, I'll restructure everything. The penthouse, the equity, all of it. Maddie will walk away with exactly what the prenup allows. Nothing more." A pause. Then the sentence that split her world clean in half. "I never loved her. She was just strategic." The air left Maddie's lungs so slowly it almost didn't feel real. Downstairs, florists were finishing ivory arrangements. Her Vera Wang gown hung pressed and waiting. The guests were already checking into their suites. Her mother, recovering from heart surgery, believed this marriage meant security. Safety. And inside that room, the man she had trusted for 8 years was negotiating her future like a line item on a spreadsheet. Jonathan turned slightly, unaware she could hear every word. "Once I'm CEO, you'll have everything you want. Just trust me." CEO. So that was the real wedding vow. Maddie didn't cry. She didn't storm in. She didn't throw the engagement ring from Tiffany's across the marble floor. Instead, something colder settled inside her chest. Slowly, she lifted her own phone. Her hands were steady now. She pressed record. If Jonathan Reed wanted a performance for the board of directors, she would give him one, and she would make sure the final act belonged to her. He thought he was marrying a woman in love. He had no idea he was about to marry a witness. 8 months earlier, so life had felt polished and certain, like something carefully planned and beautifully wrapped. Spring had just begun to soften Central Park. The trees were dusted with pale green, and the air carried that rare kind of warmth that makes New York seem almost kind. The night before, Maddie had run a major charity gala at the Plaza Hotel. It had taken weeks of pressure, late calls, impossible client demands, but she pulled it off flawlessly. She woke up tired, yes, but deeply satisfied. Jonathan suggested a morning walk. "You don't slow down," he told her gently, brushing a strand of hair away from her cheek. "One day, I'll be the one taking care of you." She teased him for that. Jonathan wasn't usually sentimental. He was structured, composed, always thinking 2 steps ahead. Big promises weren't his style. That was part of why she believed him when he made one. They paused near Bow Bridge. Somewhere nearby, a violinist played a familiar tune. People strolled past, not wrapped in their own conversations, unaware they were stepping into someone else's turning point. Then Jonathan slipped a hand into his coat pocket. The flash of a small turquoise box caught her breath before she even understood why. He looked at her steadily. 8 years, he said. "We've built something real. I don't just want you beside me at home. I want you beside me in everything. Life, business, the future." The future. He often called it legacy, a word that sounded solid, permanent. When he opened the Tiffany & Company box, the diamond caught the sunlight and scattered it. A woman nearby stopped and smiled. Someone lifted a phone, sensing a moment worth recording. "Marry me," he said quietly. "Let's make this permanent." In that instant, Maddie saw stability. Her mother's medical bills covered, their professional power combined, their names aligned, not just in love, but in leadership. She said yes. What she didn't notice was how smoothly he shifted the conversation, days later, toward contracts and restructuring. Over dinner at the River Cafe, with the skyline glowing behind him, He spoke about efficiency, about flexibility, about adjusting equity for growth. It sounded reasonable, responsible, and she believed him. At 41, love doesn't feel reckless. It feels steady, thought through, safe. She was planning a marriage. He was outlining a strategy. And somewhere in the fine print, her trust had already been factored in. The prenup meeting didn't feel like something that belonged between two people about to get married. It felt more like a business merger. 3 weeks after the proposal, Maddie found herself sitting in a glass conference room on Park Avenue, staring at a thick stack of documents. The diamond on her finger caught the light every time she moved her hand, but somehow the papers felt heavier than the ring. Outside, traffic crawled under a dull gray sky. Inside, everything was quiet except for the faint hum of the building and the distant clink of coffee cups. Marcus Hale sat across from her, glasses low on his nose, studying her face more than the contract. "Read it again," he said gently, "and don't rush." Jonathan, beside her, looked completely at ease. He scrolled through emails on his iPad, relaxed, like this was just another meeting on his calendar. "It's standard," he said. "We're both successful. This protects both of us." Protect. The word sounded comforting. It also sounded distant. Marcus slid one page closer to her. If the marriage ends, Jonathan keeps controlling interest in any expanded assets created after the wedding. That includes new divisions. Maddie blinked. "But the event division is mine." Jonathan finally met her eyes, calm and reassuring. "And it will stay yours. This is about structure, not control." Structure. Another safe-sounding word. Marcus didn't look convinced. "There's also a morality clause. If either of you damages the company's reputation, there are financial consequences." "That applies to both of us," Jonathan replied smoothly. Maddie felt something tighten in her chest. The ballroom at the plaza was booked, deposits paid, invitations mailed. Her mother had already told everyone at church. Walking away now would mean explanations, whispers, embarrassment. "I'm not planning on leaving," she said quietly. "So why should this scare me?" Marcus held her gaze. "Well, because paper doesn't forget." Jonathan reached for her hand. His palm was warm, familiar. "Madeline," he said softly, "this is just preparing for worst-case scenarios." Worst case. That felt far away, almost impossible. She signed. The pen glided easily across the page. She told herself this was what grown-up love looked like. Practical, responsible, secure. She didn't see how one small clause shifted future ownership toward him. She only saw the man she loved sitting beside her, and she believed that was enough. The first sign was so small, Maddie almost brushed it aside. It began with longer nights at the office. Jonathan had always been driven. That was part of what she admired about him. But lately, his schedule felt different. Not busier. Just rearranged. More last-minute executive dinners. More strategy meetings that appeared out of nowhere. He started carrying his MacBook everywhere, even from the kitchen to the living room, as if the device couldn't be left alone for a second. When a message popped up, he tilted the screen away automatically, like muscle memory. One night, just before midnight, Maddie walked into the living room and saw him standing by the window. The Manhattan skyline shimmered behind him. He ended his call the second he noticed her. "Board issue," he said quickly. "At this hour?" she asked, keeping her tone light. He gave a small shrug. "If you want the top job, you don't punch out at 5. There it was again. CEO, always somewhere in the conversation. A few days later, she reached for his phone teasingly while they were sitting on the couch. He pulled it back too fast, then forced a smile. "Work confidentiality," he said. "You don't want to accidentally know something you shouldn't." She nodded, but the moment lingered. Then there was the perfume. It wasn't dramatic, just faint. Something floral and unfamiliar clinging to the collar of his jacket when she hung it up. She stood in the closet longer than she needed to, breathing it in, trying to convince herself she was imagining things. In public, he was perfect, attentive, affectionate, his hand steady at her waist during company events, compliments delivered smoothly in front of the board, a kiss on her cheek whenever a camera appeared. It felt polished. One Friday afternoon, while sorting contracts in the home office, she noticed his phone light up on the desk. Claire D. 2 words previewed on the screen. Miss you already. Then it vanished. Her pulse didn't spike. It dropped, like something settling into place. Claire Donovan, the new marketing director. Sharp, stylish, always a little too confident. Maddie sat there for a long time, staring at nothing in particular. No proof, no confrontation, just a quiet shift in the air. That night he held her close and talked about the Hamptons, about the wedding, about their future. She lay awake after he fell asleep, and for the first time in 8 years, she stopped feeling certain. If this had only been about heartbreak, Maddie might have made a different choice. But it wasn't just about her. 3 months before the wedding, her mother collapsed in the middle of Sunday service at their small church in Queens. 1 second, she was singing beside her in the pew. The next, she was slipping to the floor, her voice gone, her face drained of color. The sound of the choir faltered. Someone shouted for help. The flashing ambulance lights turned the stained glass into something harsh and unreal. Maddie rode to Mount Sinai in silence, holding her mother's hand so tightly her fingers ached. The doctors didn't soften it. A damaged valve. Surgery. Soon. In the hospital room, surrounded by the steady rhythm of machines, her mother tried to keep things light. "Don't you dare delay that wedding," she murmured, managing a weak smile. "I raised you better than that." Maddie tried to laugh. It caught in her throat. Insurance would cover part of the operation. The rest felt overwhelming. Bills began arriving before she could even process the diagnosis. Thick envelopes, stark numbers. Jonathan stepped in immediately. He spoke with hospital administrators, reviewed estimates, asked precise questions. Watching him scroll through costs on his iPad, calm and composed, felt strangely reassuring. "We'll figure it out," he told her. "But you don't have to carry this alone." And for the first time, she let herself lean on him. The penthouse, the joint financial plans, the future they kept discussing. Those things stopped feeling like symbols of romance and started looking like lifelines. Her mother adored him. "He's solid," she said one afternoon, adjusting the thin hospital blanket. "That's what matters. Solid." That was what Maddie thought she needed. Not fireworks, not uncertainty, and just someone steady when life tipped sideways. So when unease crept in, late-night calls, the guarded phone, she pushed it aside. Stress does strange things to people, she told herself. Pressure changes behavior. This was a complicated season. At the kitchen counter, Jonathan reviewed the growing stack of invoices and spoke about how much stronger their position would be once their finances merged. "There's real stability ahead," he said. She wanted to believe that. Sitting beside her mother's bed one evening, listening to the soft beeping in the dim room, Maddie made a quiet promise to herself. She would hold everything together. She didn't see that the safety she was clinging to might already be shifting beneath her feet. Claire Donovan didn't make an entrance so much as she made an impression. The first time Maddie saw her was at a leadership meeting. Claire stood next to Jonathan, calm and polished in a cream suit, while her credentials flashed across the screen behind her. Columbia MBA. Big campaigns. Bigger numbers. The kind of resume that makes a room sit up straighter. Jonathan sounded almost proud introducing her. She's leading the national rebrand, he said. Exactly what we need for what's next. Maddie smiled from across the table and told herself that was a good thing. Growth was good. Fresh energy was good. Claire's handshake was confident, her smile steady, and she looked people in the eye like she was already measuring where they stood. At first, there was nothing to question. Claire worked hard, spoke clearly, backed her ideas with data. Maddie even respected how prepared she always seemed. There was no flirting, no whispered conversations in corners, nothing obvious. That was what unsettled her. The travel started soon after. Brand alignment, Jonathan called it. Chicago 1 week, Miami the next, San Francisco after that. The flight details were always shared openly, nothing hidden. It just makes sense for us to go together, Jonathan said one evening, buttoning his cuffs. And it did make sense. At company events, Claire kept her distance, professional, appropriate. But Maddie began noticing things that couldn't be written into a report. The way Claire leaned in slightly when Jonathan spoke, the way he glanced at her before answering certain questions, as if checking her reaction. Small things, easy to dismiss. One afternoon, Maddie walked into the executive lounge without knocking and found them sitting close over a laptop. They shifted apart quickly, but not dramatically. Just numbers, Claire said, smiling. Of course, Maddie replied. Later that week, Claire stopped by her office with 2 coffees. I hope this transition feels collaborative, she said gently. I'd never want you to feel pushed aside. Pushed aside. The word lingered. That night, scrolling through photos from a Miami conference, Maddie spotted Jonathan and Claire in the background of someone else's post. They stood close, closer than necessary. She stared at the image longer than she meant to. Nothing was obvious. But something was changing. If it hadn't been for the numbers, she might have kept doubting herself. Spreadsheets had always made sense to Maddie. Budgets, vendor invoices, sponsorship splits. She saw rhythm in them. She could tell when something was slightly off the way other people notice a picture hanging crooked on a wall. That Tuesday afternoon, she was reviewing quarterly projections for her events division when a line item made her pause. Marketing reallocation. It didn't look dramatic. Money moved from regional campaigns into something labeled Strategic Growth Initiative. Still, the amount was high enough to matter. 6 figures. She leaned closer to the screen. Jonathan's executive authorization code was attached. The receiving account carried a name she didn't recognize. Vanguard Strategic. She clicked into the ledger. 2 transfers. Same day. A few hours apart. Split neatly. It wasn't sloppy. It was deliberate. That evening, she brought it up casually while Jonathan stood at the kitchen island pouring sparkling water. Hey, she said, keeping her tone light. What's Vanguard Strategic under marketing? He didn't hesitate. Expansion prep and setting funds aside before the national rollout. So it's internal? Of course. He looked at her evenly, not defensive, not irritated, just smooth. I didn't see it in the board packet, she added. It's early stage, he replied. No need to bring it to the board yet. On paper, his answer worked. Later, after he was asleep, Maddie sat alone at the dining table. The city shimmered beyond the glass walls of the penthouse. She opened her laptop again, and logging in through an older set of credentials most people forgot she still had. She searched for Vanguard Strategic, a registered address in Midtown. She copied it down. Then she checked public records. Vanguard Strategic Consulting, LLC. Formed 6 months ago. Managing partner, Claire Donovan. Maddie stared at the screen for a long time. Her heart didn't race. It steadied. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't paranoia. Company money had moved into an outside firm owned by the woman traveling with her fiancé. She closed the laptop gently. The late nights, The travel, the guarded phone. They weren't random anymore. They formed a line. And once you see the line, you can't unsee it. Maddie didn't storm into Jonathan's office. She didn't text Claire. She didn't even raise her voice. She called Marcus. He picked up quickly. After she asked to see him, there was a pause on the line. You sound very composed," he said. "That worries me." They met the next morning at his office on Park Avenue. The place was neat in a quiet, old-school way. Dark wood shelves, heavy desk, the faint smell of coffee. From the window, traffic moved below in slow, predictable lines. Everything felt steady, controlled. Maddie placed 2 sheets of paper in front of him. One was the public registration for Vanguard Strategic. The other showed the internal transfer. She didn't explain, or she didn't need to. Marcus read carefully, his eyes moving line by line. The only sign of reaction was the tightening in his jaw. "Company funds," he said at last. "Approved by Jonathan, sent to a consulting firm." He tapped the registration page. "Owned by Claire Donovan." Maddie nodded. He looked at her for a long moment. "Does he know you've seen this?" "No." A slight shift in his posture. "Good." The room fell quiet, but it wasn't awkward. It felt like the kind of silence before a chess move. "There are a few ways this could be structured," Marcus said. "It might be unethical, but technically defensible, or it might cross into something far more serious." Maddie clasped her hands together. "Which option protects me?" "That depends," he replied gently. "Are you trying to fix your marriage, or protect yourself?" The question landed heavier than she expected. 8 years together. A wedding days away. Her mother still recovering. A prenup already signed. "I need to come out of this standing," she said finally. "With my reputation intact." Marcus gave a slow nod. "Then we don't react. We gather facts, quietly. And then, we let him believe he's in control." He walked to the window, watching the steady rhythm of the city below. "People who think they're winning get careless." Maddie felt something settle inside her. The ache was still there, but it wasn't running the show anymore. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Patience," he said. "And access." She took a breath. For the first time since that message flashed across Jonathan's screen, she didn't feel blindsided. She felt ready. If Jonathan was building something behind her back, she wouldn't tear it down too soon. She would let him finish it, and then decide what to do with it. The morning of the wedding was bright, almost painfully beautiful. From the suite at the plaza, Maddie watched Fifth Avenue wake up. Taxis idled at the curb. The florists carried in tall arrangements of white roses. Somewhere below, a violinist tested a melody that floated faintly through the glass. The city moved as if this were any other perfect day. Inside the room, everything was arranged just as she had planned months ago. Her Vera Wang gown hung by the window, soft and weightless. Her engagement ring caught the light each time she moved her hand. If someone had walked in at that moment, they would have seen nothing but a bride on her wedding day. Her phone lay on the vanity. The recording was still there. She had played it twice during the night, not to relive the hurt, but to remember the truth. Jonathan's voice had sounded distant, almost bored. After the honeymoon, restructure everything. She won't see it coming. But she had seen it. There was a gentle knock. Her mother stepped inside, dressed in pale blue, moving carefully but determined to look strong. "You're already glowing," her mother said, squeezing her hands. Maddie smiled. "Well, I'm okay." And she was. Not because it didn't hurt, not because she had forgiven anything, but because she knew what she was walking into. While the stylist pinned her hair, Maddie reread Marcus's early morning email. The paperwork was ready. A supplemental agreement, simple enough to seem routine. If Jonathan signed it, as he likely would, It would shift more control than he realized. "Any doubts?" her mother asked softly, catching her eyes in the mirror. Maddie held her gaze. "I don't know." Laughter drifted in from the hallway. The groomsmen had arrived. She could hear Jonathan's voice, steady, confident, unaware. Her phone buzzed. A message from Claire. "Big day. Hope you're ready for everything to change." Maddie stared at the screen for a long moment. Everything already had. She turned the phone face down. When she finally stood and smoothed the front of her gown, she studied her reflection carefully. She didn't look broken. She looked prepared. The ballroom doors opened without a sound. Music drifted through the space. Soft, practiced, expensive. The chandeliers overhead threw warm light across the marble floor. Every chair was filled. Board members, investors, old friends, people who thought they were here to celebrate a powerful couple sealing their future. Maddie stood at the entrance with her mother's arm looped through hers. For a second, she just breathed. At the end of the aisle, Jonathan waited in a perfectly fitted tuxedo, and standing tall, looking exactly like a man who believed everything was unfolding according to plan. He smiled when he saw her. She started walking. The sound of her heels was steady, measured. She could feel the room watching. Admiration, curiosity, quiet envy. Phones lifted discreetly. A few guests dabbed at their eyes. Jonathan's expression softened as she approached. Relief flickered there. Maybe even pride. "You're stunning," he whispered when she reached him. "Thank you," she said, while holding his gaze. The officiant began, speaking about commitment and trust, about building a life rooted in honesty. The words felt almost ironic hanging in the air. Jonathan delivered his vows first. Confident. Smooth. He spoke about loyalty, about partnership, about building a legacy together. The crowd responded warmly when he joked about Maddie being the tougher negotiator between them. Legacy. When it was her turn, Maddie unfolded a small paper she had tucked into her bouquet, and her hands were steady. "I believe marriage requires transparency," she said clearly. "Not just in love, but in responsibility." Jonathan's smile tightened, just slightly. She turned toward him fully. "Before we finish, there's one document I think we should both acknowledge today." A faint murmur moved through the front rows. Marcus rose from his seat and approached, composed as always, holding a slim folder. "It's simply an additional agreement," Maddie explained calmly. "Clarifying shared oversight on any new financial partnerships." Jonathan leaned closer. "This isn't necessary," he muttered. "It protects us both," she replied quietly. All eyes were on them now. Marcus handed him the pen. Jonathan hesitated, but only briefly. Confidence carried him through. He signed. The sound of paper shifting was louder than it should have been. When Maddie looked at him again, she saw it. A crack. Not fear, but doubt. And for the first time that morning, and Jonathan wasn't entirely certain he was in control. The applause came easily after Jonathan signed. People smiled, assuming it was some polished, modern addition to the ceremony. A few guests even chuckled, impressed by what looked like a power couple handling business before vows. The tension dissolved just enough for everyone to relax again. Jonathan handed the pen back with confidence. The officiant prepared to continue. But Maddie stayed where she was. "Before we exchange rings," she said, her voice steady, "there's something I need to share." Jonathan's hand brushed hers, firm but subtle, a quiet signal. "Madeline," he whispered, still smiling for the room. "Let's not make this complicated." She eased her hand away. "It won't be." The shift in the room was small but noticeable. Conversations stopped. A few heads tilted. Maddie reached into the ribbon wrapped around her bouquet and took out her phone. No dramatic gestures. No shaking hands. She simply tapped the screen. A faint crackle echoed through the speakers. Then Jonathan's voice filled the ballroom. "I'll transfer the shares after the honeymoon. She won't see it coming." The air changed. Jonathan's posture stiffened. Maddie kept her gaze straight ahead. "The wedding is optics. The board needs stability. After that, I'll restructure everything." A quiet gasp came from somewhere near the front. "And Maddie?" Claire's voice asked. "She was strategic." The word hung in the air longer than it should have. Then silence. Thick. Heavy. Jonathan recovered first, though his face had lost its color. "This is completely out of context," he said quickly. "It's business terminology. A private discussion." Maddie turned to him slowly. "Is it?" she asked. He searched her face, looking for hesitation. For the woman who once trusted him without question. She wasn't there anymore. In the front row, 2 board members exchanged a look. An investor folded his arms. Maddie saw her mother's expression. Shock, and then pain. Jonathan leaned closer. "We'll handle this privately," he said under his breath. She shook her head. "We've been very public today." Facing the room, she spoke clearly. "I believed I was entering a partnership, not a negotiation." Whispers began to spread. Not loud, but growing. Jonathan had built his reputation on control, and now, in a room full of the people whose opinions mattered most to him, he was losing it. The silence didn't shatter. It shifted. At first it was just a murmur. Quiet voices leaning toward one another. The subtle rustle of fabric as people adjusted in their seats. No one raised their voice. These were investors, executives. They didn't react loudly. They evaluated. Jonathan drew himself up, smoothing his expression the way he always did in tense meetings. "This is being misinterpreted," he said. Louder now. "It's internal strategy language, nothing more." He glanced toward 2 senior board members in the front row. "You understand how expansion planning works." They didn't rush to defend him. Marcus stepped forward again, measured and composed. "This isn't about phrasing," he said. "It's about financial structure." He lifted the agreement Jonathan had signed minutes earlier. "This document requires full transparency on any new consulting partnerships, effective immediately." A small pause. "Including Vanguard Strategic Consulting." The name felt heavier than the recording had. Jonathan's jaw flexed. "No, that's separate." "It isn't," Marcus replied. "Company funds were redirected there last quarter." The reaction this time was visible. Heads turned, brows furrowed. Jonathan looked at Maddie, not with hurt, with calculation. "You've been investigating me," he said under his breath. "I've been paying attention," she answered. Marcus placed printed summaries on a nearby table. "The transfers authorized by Mr. Reed moved substantial funds into an entity registered to Mrs. Claire Donovan." All eyes shifted to the back of the room. Claire sat very still. Color drained from her face. "It's a standard consulting arrangement," Jonathan said, pushing the words out. "Completely legitimate." "Was it disclosed to the board?" an investor asked sharply. Jonathan hesitated. It was brief. But in a room like this, hesitation echoed. Marcus spoke again, calm but firm. "By signing this agreement today, Mr. Reed acknowledged that all such arrangements require shared review. Failure to disclose prior transfers may be considered a breach of fiduciary responsibility." The word breach hung in the air. Maddie stayed silent. Jonathan had signed the document himself, in front of everyone. "You planned this," he whispered to her. She met his eyes. "No, you did." The officiant had stepped back entirely. The ceremony was forgotten. A board member rose from his seat. "We'll initiate an immediate review." Another nodded. "Effective today." Jonathan looked around the ballroom. The investors, the executives, the cameras still recording. He had wanted a flawless public image. Instead, he was watching it unravel in front of the very people he'd hoped to impress. The room didn't explode. It tightened. Voices dropped into hushed conversations. Board members leaned toward each other, speaking in low, careful tones. A few assistants slipped out into the hallway, phones already pressed to their ears. The chandeliers still sparkled overhead, but the celebration had drained out of the air. Jonathan tried to steady things. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "A personal issue dressed up as corporate misconduct." Maddie didn't react. Then a chair scraped softly near the back. Claire stood up. The shift was immediate. People turned in their seats. Even the whispering paused. She didn't look polished now. The confidence she usually wore like armor had thinned. She looked human. "I need to clarify something," she said. "Not defensive, not apologetic, just direct." "Claire," Jonathan said sharply, "sit down." She didn't move. "Yes, Vanguard Strategic is under my name," she continued, facing the board. "But I didn't design the structure. Jonathan did." A wave of surprise moved through the room. Jonathan took a step toward her. "Think carefully about what you're saying." "I have," she replied quietly. She pulled her phone from her clutch. "I kept the emails, the drafts, the instructions. I formalized what I was told to formalize." Maddie watched her closely. This wasn't loyalty shifting. It was survival. Claire swallowed once before continuing. "I was told it would be disclosed later, that the board would understand once the numbers justified it." A board member leaned forward. "Do you have those communications?" "Yes." Jonathan's composure faltered. "Why, you benefited from that contract," he said. Claire didn't deny it. "Yes, but I'm not taking full responsibility for something I didn't initiate." That landed hard. Marcus stepped forward. "We strongly recommend securing all relevant digital records immediately." Jonathan turned toward Maddie, anger rising under disbelief. "You orchestrated this?" She met his eyes calmly. "You underestimated everyone." The officiant had stepped aside entirely. The wedding planner stood near the wall, frozen. Claire lowered her phone slowly. "I didn't plan for this to happen today," she said, but it had. And in choosing to protect herself, she'd done what Jonathan hadn't anticipated. She'd confirmed the truth. The room wasn't arguing anymore. It was deciding. It happened quietly, but you could feel it. The energy in the room shifted, not with shouting, not with chaos, but with something colder. A wedding crowd might react with tears or anger. This crowd calculated. Within minutes, the celebration had dissolved into quiet strategy. Two board members stepped aside near the stage, speaking in low voices. Assistants were already pulling out phones, sending messages, arranging access to internal systems. Someone mentioned legal counsel before the night was over. Jonathan still stood beneath the flowers, tuxedo flawless, posture straight. But the center of the room had moved away from him. "This is premature," he said, trying to steady the situation. "We can handle this internally." One of the board members looked at him evenly. "Internal matters are disclosed before they're discovered." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Maddie remained where she was. She didn't gloat. She didn't argue. She stood in her wedding gown with her hands loosely clasped, as if this were simply another executive meeting she had attended 100 times before. Her mother watched from the front row, shaken but steady. Claire had sunk back into her seat, quiet now, eyes lowered. Marcus moved through the room calmly, speaking with counsel, making sure the signed document was copied and secured. He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. Jonathan made one more attempt. "This is retaliation," he said, tension creeping in. "A private conversation weaponized." A senior investor stood slowly. "What concerns us isn't the recording," he replied. "It's the undisclosed financial relationship." That word, undisclosed, hung heavily in the air. Jonathan's composure faltered for just a moment. For years, he had controlled rooms like this, controlled perception, controlled timing. Now the same people who once trusted his precision were studying him differently. Cameras were still recording. Guests were whispering. By the time the ballroom emptied, this story would already be moving beyond it. Maddie finally spoke again. "I didn't want humiliation," she said. "I wanted clarity." Jonathan looked at her, and for the first time, and he seemed unsure, a board member addressed him directly. "Effective immediately, you'll step back pending review." No drama followed, no applause, just consequence settling in. And in that glittering ballroom, under lights meant for celebration, control changed hands. By the time people started filing out, the ballroom didn't feel like a place where vows had almost been exchanged. It felt like something had ended. Small groups stood near the doors, talking in low voices. No one laughed anymore. A few guests avoided eye contact altogether. The musicians had packed up early, their instruments resting silently against velvet chairs. Maddie slipped off her heels and carried them in one hand as she walked into a quieter hallway. The marble floor was cool under her bare feet. With each step, the noise behind her faded. Her mother followed a few seconds later. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Maddie nodded. "I am." And she meant it. They stood together without saying much. No dramatic embrace, just a shared breath in the stillness of the corridor. At the far end, Jonathan stepped out of a side room with two board members. His jacket hung open now. He looked unsettled, like someone who had misread a room and couldn't fix it. When he saw Maddie, he stopped. "This didn't have to happen this way," he said. She looked at him carefully. He seemed different, not weaker exactly, but exposed. "You made your decisions," she replied. "Today just made them visible." He rubbed his forehead, frustration creeping through. "You embarrassed me." "I told the truth," she said. "That's not the same thing." The board members remained nearby, quiet but watchful. The review had already started, access suspended, accounts frozen. Jonathan lowered his voice. "This isn't over." "No," she said calmly. "It's just starting." He searched her face for doubt, for second thoughts. He didn't find them. Claire walked past a moment later, guided by HR, eyes fixed straight ahead. Whatever connection she and Jonathan once had was gone. Marcus approached Maddie with a simple nod. "Everything's secured." She understood what that meant. Jonathan looked between them and finally seemed to grasp how far things had shifted. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Maddie stepped inside with her mother. As the doors closed, she saw Jonathan standing alone under the bright hotel lights. The reception was over, but something new had just begun. The headlines started quietly. By the next morning, a few financial blogs were already hinting at executive irregularities inside a well-known hospitality group. Clips from the wedding, just seconds at a time, circulated in private investor circles. Jonathan's expression, the board members' reactions, the audio. It didn't explode across social media. It moved carefully. By 9 o'clock, Jonathan's building access had been suspended. Security met him at a side entrance when he came in. No cameras, no public statement. Just a formal notice. Administrative leave pending review. Maddie saw it all from her office down the hall. Same building. Different weight in the air. Her name wasn't mentioned in any article. That wasn't luck. Marcus had made sure of it. The language focused on financial procedure, governance, compliance. Not betrayal. Not the wedding. That difference mattered. Claire turned over her emails before noon. Drafts, timestamps, forwarded instructions. It wasn't dramatic. It was documented. And documentation carries more weight than outrage. As the week unfolded, the audit widened. More transfers surfaced. Consulting retainers structured oddly. Delayed disclosures. Nothing flashy. Just enough to show a pattern. And once you see a pattern, it's hard to unsee it. Jonathan asked to meet on Thursday. They sat across from each other in a neutral conference room overlooking Park Avenue. Traffic below moved steadily, indifferent to whatever was happening upstairs. He looked worn down. "This didn't have to go this far," he said. "You had time," she answered. "You chose not to use it." He shook his head. "You're tearing down everything we built." She met his eyes. "You put it at risk." Silence settled between them. "They're pushing me out," he said at last. She didn't respond. "Is that what you wanted?" Maddie thought about it. "I wanted honesty," she said. "The rest is fallout." He searched her face, maybe hoping for softness, but he still sounded more frustrated than sorry. By Friday, the board released a short statement. Jonathan Reed would step down effective immediately. An interim CFO would take over. No drama, no spectacle, just removal. For years, Jonathan had believed he could control the outcome. Now the outcome was controlling him. Jonathan came back 3 weeks later. No press, no lawyers, no careful statements prepared in advance. Just him, standing outside her door. Maddie was still in the penthouse. The wedding had never happened, but 8 years of shared property doesn't unravel overnight. Papers were being processed, accounts divided. It all took time. When the doorbell rang, she stood there for a moment before opening it. He looked smaller, not messy, not broken. Jonathan would never let himself appear undone, but something steady inside him had shifted. "Can we talk?" he asked. She stepped aside. They sat at the kitchen island where they had once gone over budgets and hospital bills and honeymoon reservations. The same marble surface, a different conversation. "I resigned yesterday," he said. "It's official." She nodded. She'd already heard. He folded his hands together. It wasn't a gesture she recognized on him. "I made mistakes." She studied him. "You built a secret financial arrangement with someone you were involved with. That's not a small error." He looked down briefly. "I didn't mean to hurt you. It started as a business move. I thought I could control it." Control. That word again. "And Claire?" she asked. He hesitated. "It wasn't what you're thinking." "It was enough," she replied. They sat in silence for a few seconds that felt longer than they should have. "I did care about you," he said finally. The past tense didn't go unnoticed. "You cared about what I represented," she answered quietly. "Stability, credibility, a clean image." He didn't argue. "I've lost everything," he said. She shook her head slightly. "You lost your position. That's different." He looked around the room, at the skyline beyond the windows, at the life they had built together. "I thought I was protecting our future." "You were protecting yourself." The words weren't harsh, just honest. "I'm sorry," he said again, and softer this time. For a moment, she remembered the man she had once trusted. The dinners, the shared routines, the plans that had felt real. But remembering isn't the same as rebuilding. "I hope you grow from this," she said. He searched her face. "That's it?" "That's enough." She walked him to the door. This time, when he left, there was no promise hanging in the air. The quiet that came afterward felt strange at first. No urgent calls, no tense meetings, no constant undercurrent of stress, just silence. About a month later, Maddie moved out of the penthouse. She didn't rush it. No angry packing. No dramatic goodbyes. She took her time, folded things carefully, decided what to keep. Her new place was smaller, with wide windows facing the Hudson. Fewer rooms, more light. When she unlocked the door that first night, the space felt open in a way the penthouse never had. The company adjusted too. The interim CFO became permanent. Jonathan's exit was handled in a short, not carefully worded statement. Claire resigned before anything formal moved forward. New policies were announced about transparency and disclosure. Nothing exploded. Things shifted. When Maddie returned to work, no one made a spectacle of it. A few coworkers were awkward. A few were quietly supportive. Most simply treated her like they always had, which, oddly enough, felt like respect. A week later, the CEO asked her to step into his office. "We need steadiness," he said, "and we need someone we can trust." He offered her expanded oversight across regional operations, not just events. It wasn't sympathy, it was responsibility. She thought about it overnight, then accepted. At home, she settled into small routines: coffee by the window in the mornings, walks along the river at dusk, long phone calls with her mother, who was healing well and sounding stronger every week. One evening, she opened a box she'd avoided. Inside was a sample wedding invitation. On thick cream paper, gold lettering. She ran her fingers over it once, then slid it back into the box. It didn't need to be destroyed. It just didn't belong to her anymore. Marcus came by later that week with the final legal documents. "It's done," he said. "Everything's separated." She signed quietly. "You were strong," he added as he gathered his papers. She gave a small smile. "I was clear." That night, standing at her window, watching the river reflect the city lights, Maddie noticed something she hadn't expected. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt grounded. And for the first time in a long while, that was more than enough. It didn't happen all at once. There were no dramatic confessions, no sudden turning point. It just unfolded. Marcus started stopping by her office more often, but not for emergencies. Sometimes it was a question about a contract. Sometimes it was just coffee after a long meeting. Their conversations stretched a little longer each time, a drifting away from business. At first, Maddie didn't think much of it. Her new role kept her busy. Travel filled her calendar. Boston one week, Chicago the next. She reviewed proposals carefully, double-checking every line. If there was one thing she insisted on now, it was transparency. The board noticed. They relied on her more. One evening, after a late strategy session, Marcus offered to walk her downstairs. "You've been strong through all of this," he said, as they stepped onto Park Avenue. "Well, I had to be," she replied. "You don't always have to." She looked at him, surprised by how gently he said it. They started having dinner occasionally. No labels, no announcements. Just two people sharing a meal without tension hanging over the table. One night, seated by the river, Marcus said quietly, "I almost told you how I felt years ago." She raised an eyebrow. "When?" "Before you got engaged." She smiled faintly. "Why didn't you?" "You seemed sure." "I was," she admitted. There was no anger in her voice, just memory. Marcus wasn't grand or theatrical. He didn't make sweeping promises. He listened. He remembered what her mother liked to drink. He asked about her trips and actually waited for the answer. Small things that felt steady. One Sunday, she invited him to lunch with her mother in Queens. He brought simple flowers and helped clear plates without being asked. On the drive back, Maddie noticed something new inside her. It wasn't excitement. It was peace. Weeks later, they stood together on her balcony, the Hudson reflecting the city lights. "I don't want to rush you," Marcus said. She turned to him. "I'm not afraid of what's next. I'm afraid of ignoring what feels right." He took her hand gently. And this time, There was no strategy behind it. Just warmth. Just quiet certainty. After everything loud and painful, that quiet felt like a gift she hadn't known she needed. The second wedding was nothing like the first. No ballroom filled with executives, no crystal chandeliers, no investors measuring optics from the front row. Just a small rooftop overlooking the Hudson at sunset. Maddie wore a simple ivory dress that moved easily in the breeze. Her mother sat in the front row, healthy now, smiling through quiet tears. A few close friends stood nearby. No press, no spectacle. Marcus stood across from her, not with polished confidence, but with steady warmth. "I don't promise perfection," he said during his vows. "I promise honesty. And I promise to stand beside you, not in front of you." The words didn't echo dramatically. They settled. When Maddie spoke, her voice carried calm certainty. "I once believed love was about building something impressive," she said. "Now I know it's about building something true." They exchanged rings without applause, without performance, just intention. Afterward, as the sun dipped lower and the sky turned soft shades of gold and rose, Maddie stood at the edge of the rooftop, looking out at the water. She thought about the first aisle she had walked down, the bright lights, the shock, the calculated betrayal. She didn't regret it, because that moment had revealed more than it destroyed. It had revealed her strength, her clarity, her boundaries. Behind her, laughter drifted across the rooftop. Marcus was helping her mother down the steps carefully, and patient as always. The company had stabilized under new leadership. Policies had strengthened. Her division thrived under her oversight. She wasn't just respected now, she was trusted. Jonathan had moved out of state quietly months earlier. No public redemption, no dramatic comeback, just consequences. Maddie didn't feel anger when she thought of him. She felt distance, and distance meant healing. Marcus joined her at the railing, slipping his hand into hers. "Happy?" he asked softly. She looked at him, then back at the skyline glowing in the evening light. "Yes," she said. Not because everything had been easy, but because she had chosen differently. Chosen clarity over comfort, truth over image, and herself over illusion. The first time she walked down an aisle, she carried proof. This time, she carried peace. And that, more than revenge, more than reputation, was the higher position. Because a wise woman doesn't need to win loudly. She simply rises and never steps back down. So, that's where her story closes. And if you're still here with me right now, truly still here, then something in this story probably touched you in a quiet place. Maybe it wasn't the wedding. Maybe it wasn't the betrayal. Maybe it was the moment she chose clarity over comfort. Let's look at this together for a second. Life doesn't always break us loudly. Sometimes it reveals us. Maddie didn't win because she exposed someone. She won because she refused to abandon herself. But that's the real shift. As Ayn Rand once wrote in The Virtue of Selfishness, the question isn't who is going to let me, it's who is going to stop me. Healthy self-interest isn't cruelty. It's self-respect. It's choosing truth even when it costs you. We're often taught to endure, to stay quiet, to preserve appearances. But healing begins the moment you decide your dignity matters more than optics. That's not revenge. That's growth. If this story spoke to you, and if it reminded you of your own strength, take a moment, like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel so we can keep having conversations like this. Real ones. Because sometimes, rising quietly is the most powerful thing you'll ever do. Before we close, I want to gently clarify something important. This story is a work of fiction created for dramatic and educational purposes. while it reflects real-life themes like trust, accountability, personal growth, and professional ethics. The characters and events are imagined. The corporate processes, legal discussions, and relationship dynamics are portrayed in a realistic way to explore emotional resilience, not to make factual claims about any real company or individual. The intention of this content is to share a meaningful narrative about self-respect, integrity, and healing after betrayal. It is not meant to defame, accuse, or misrepresent any real person or organization. Or if you connected with this story, it's likely because the emotions are universal, not because the events are literal. Thank you for understanding and for being part of a thoughtful, respectful community here.